On Thanksgiving Day, I was standing on my parents' front porch, staring at a half-open door. Through the narrow gap, my mother and father looked at me with cold, annoyed faces, while my childhood best friend, Ethan, stood in the hallway sipping wine and actively avoiding my gaze. My father didn't open the door. Instead, he snapped, "We told you this was a small gathering. You aren't invited. Go home." I calmly placed the homemade pies I had spent hours baking onto the dirt of the doormat, turned around, and walked back to my car. My family and my best friend thought they had successfully blacklisted me from the holiday dinner. What they didn't know was that while I was sitting in my car, I was hitting send on a legal file that would freeze my parents' bank accounts, trigger an immediate police warrant for grand larceny, and completely shut down Ethan's business by morning. Before I tell you how I uncovered their secret group chat and exposed their massive financial fraud, I want to ask, where are you watching this video from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, let's go back to how this ultimate betrayal began. My name is Teresa. I grew up in a quiet town, trapped inside a family dynamic that looked completely pristine on the surface. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were highly respected pillars of the community. My father was a prominent local businessman, permanently absorbed in his corporate deals, and my mother was a high society socialite who lived for throwing elaborate parties. Then there was my younger sister, Lily. Lily was the undisputed favorite, a wild child who constantly skipped classes, ran into trouble with the law, and drained my parents' bank accounts, yet she was always instantly forgiven. I was the exact opposite, the responsible child, the designated fixer, the doormat. When I was 18, my father's business hit a severe rough patch. Without a single complaint, I took a grueling part-time job to quietly help pay the family's household bills, believing it was my absolute duty as a daughter. As the years passed, that toxic pattern ossified. I excelled in school, built a successful career, and remained the reliable safety net whenever my family faced a crisis. But by early November, the atmosphere shifted into something deeply sinister. Normally, my mother and I spent weeks co-planning our massive Thanksgiving dinner. But when I called her to coordinate, her tone was icy and dismissive. "I'm far too busy, Teresa. Your father needs me for a high-profile corporate event," she snapped, before abruptly hanging up on me. I rationalized it, telling myself she was just stressed over a new business competitor and Lily's latest chaotic breakup. A week later, I drove over to their house unannounced to drop off a set of premium curtains I had bought for their living room. Using my emergency key, I stepped inside and heard loud laughter echoing from the living room. But the exact moment my foot crossed the threshold, the entire room plunged into a suffocating, dead silence. Lily frantically flipped her phone screen downward, my mother nervously smoothed her dress while refusing to meet my eyes, and my father cleared his throat with intense discomfort. "Teresa," he muttered, his face tightening. "We had no idea you were coming." When I held up the gift, hoping for a shred of warmth, his response was freezing. "Just throw them in the hallway." Not a single thank you. When I asked if everything was all right, Lily interjected with an aggressive sneer, "It's just private family stuff. Nothing you'd ever be interested in." I tried to diffuse the tension with a light joke, reminding them that I was family too, but no one laughed. I felt like a total stranger in the house I grew up in. Then came the total betrayal from Ethan. Ethan and I had been inseparable best friends since early childhood, maintaining a strict tradition of going fishing every single Saturday morning. 2 weeks before the holiday, I texted him to confirm our usual trip. The message marked as delivered, but he completely ghosted me. When I called him later that night, it rang through to voicemail. I left a warm, concerned message, but the silence that followed was completely deafening. Over the next 10 days, the isolation became absolute. When I crossed paths with my aunt at the local grocery store, she visibly panicked and practically sprinted down a different aisle to avoid me. When I left a supportive comment on my cousin's Instagram profile, the entire post was instantly deleted. I felt like an invisible ghost, aggressively erased from my own life. The tipping point occurred 48 hours before Thanksgiving. I dropped by my parents' house to leave some fresh flowers on the counter. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar luxury vehicle parked outside. Stepping through the unlocked front door, the house appeared entirely empty, but as I passed the home study, I noticed my mother's personal tablet glowing on the desk. A live notification popped up on the screen. It was a text from my aunt that read, "Don't worry, he has no idea. This Thanksgiving will be absolutely perfect without her." My heart hammered against my ribs. I touched the screen, there was no passcode. I opened the messaging app and felt physically sick to my stomach. My entire family, along with my best friend, had created a massive group chat titled, "Thanksgiving x Teresa." I scrolled up to the pinned messages and found an image of the exclusive guest list. My parents, Lily, my aunts, my uncles, and Ethan were all neatly listed. My name was nowhere to be found. I kept scrolling through the history, reading the raw text messages that completely dismantled my reality. Lily had texted, "Mom, I'm genuinely worried she's just going to show up unannounced. Teresa is so incredibly persistent." My mother had replied, "She won't. I was deliberately freezing cold to her at the mall. She naively thinks we're just busy." My uncle chipped in, "Did Ethan confirm he handled his side of the plan? We need ironclad assurance that she doesn't crash the dinner." And then came the message from my best friend, "Ethan, I haven't answered a single one of her calls or texts in 2 weeks. She has absolutely no clue. I am completely handling her." But the final dagger came from my own father, the man whose bills I had paid. "Let's just enjoy a single holiday without her. She is always so exhausting with her self-sacrificing routine, and she constantly keeps score. I just want a peaceful dinner for once." I dropped the tablet, stumbling out of the house in a complete daze. They didn't love me, they never had. They merely tolerated my existence when my hard work and money were useful to them. The very next morning, the universe handed me the ultimate weapon. I opened my mailbox to find an urgent, past-due notice from a financial institution I didn't even have an account with. Opening the letter, I was horrified to discover 3 massive fraudulent loans completely opened in my name. A credit card debt totaling $12,450, an auto loan for $28,000, and a personal line of credit for $5,000. I immediately pulled up my credit monitoring bureau. My flawless credit score had plummeted to a disastrous 620. When I dug into the forensic details of the accounts, the billing address for the fraudulent credit card was registered directly to my parents' estate. The $28,000 auto loan was mapped to the exact luxury vehicle my father had been proudly driving around town. They had stolen my social security number and my identity, using my hard-earned financial health to fund a lifestyle they could never legally qualify for. Fueled by a cold, calculative rage, I spent the entire day building an unshakable legal file. I printed out the credit histories, compiled old emails where they had requested my personal documentation under false pretenses, and organized the evidence. Then, I turned my attention to Ethan. Years prior, Ethan had begged me to co-sign a loan so his small landscaping business could acquire a piece of heavy machinery. Because I trusted him implicitly, I had signed the paperwork. Using my legal co-signer credentials, I logged directly into the state's commercial business registry to audit his corporate books. What I found was staggering. Ethan had been making massive, under-the-table payments directly to a shell company owned exclusively by my sister, Lily. Furthermore, Ethan had signed a highly lucrative contract with a local construction firm for commercial waste disposal, an operation he did not possess the legal environmental permits to run. He was using my credit to back an entirely illegal business venture, and he was actively paying off Lily to buy her silence and participation in the scheme. Which brings us back to Thanksgiving Day. I dressed in a beautiful designer outfit, packed the fresh pies, and drove straight into the lion's den. When my mother cracked the door open and told me I was completely blacklisted, I didn't argue. I didn't shed a single tear. I simply smiled, said, "Happy Thanksgiving," and left the desserts on the mat. The moment I locked myself back inside my car, I called the federal fraud hotline to formally report the identity theft, explicitly stating that I was pressing full criminal charges against my parents. Next, I fired off a comprehensive digital brief to the State Licensing Board and the Environmental Protection Agency regarding Ethan's illegal waste disposal operations, attaching every single bank ledger and registry file I had uncovered. Within exactly 10 minutes, my phone blew up into an absolute war zone. My mother called first, screaming hysterically that all of her bank accounts had been completely frozen by investigators. My father called next, bellowing over the phone that local police officers had just arrived at the front door with an active arrest warrant. Finally, Ethan called, weeping openly and begging me to show him mercy, screaming that his entire livelihood was being dismantled. I listened to him panic for a brief moment before speaking with absolute ice in my voice. "You told them you were handling me, Ethan. Now, I am handling you." I hung up the phone and drove away, leaving their country club world to burn to ashes behind me. In the chaotic weeks that followed, I retained a top-tier legal team and permanently relocated to a brand new city. My father was formally indicted and convicted of grand larceny and identity theft, while my mother was processed as an active accomplice. Ethan's commercial business was permanently dissolved by the state, leaving him financially ruined. It has been 5 years since that defining Thanksgiving Day. Today, I live in a beautiful, sunlit apartment in a city where nobody knows my family's toxic name. I am surrounded by a genuine, deeply loyal group of real friends, and I am truly happy. Every single month, a court-ordered restitution check arrives in my mailbox from my family's seized assets, but I refuse to keep a single cent of their dirty money. Instead, I endorse every check over to a local charity that provides legal and financial aid to victims of domestic and systemic financial abuse. Looking back at the image of those pies sitting on that doormat, I realize that being locked out of that house was the greatest blessing of my entire life. I am no longer the family fixer. I am no longer anyone's doormat. My name is Teresa. I am an unbreakable, entirely independent woman, and I have finally built a beautiful life that belongs completely to me.